A young man found himself reincarnated into another world, awakening an extraordinary ability called water manipulation. This skill did not merely grant him control over water, it also allowed him to tame fierce aquatic beasts, turning them into his loyal companions. However, he did not stop there. He pushed these creatures beyond their natural limits, evolving them into terrifying sea monsters. The story unfolded in a distant land where Leang stood in a daze, mesmerized by the breathtaking view of the rising sun. The golden light painted the sky, and the crisp morning air filled his lungs. It was a peaceful, surreal moment. Before he could lose himself completely in the scenery, his father's voice called out to him, snapping him back to reality. The sound, though seemingly unfamiliar at first, carried warmth and comfort. Without hesitation, he rushed to his father, determined to make the most of the day. That morning, they spent their time on the lake, checking their catch. It was an ordinary day, yet it held a simple joy, the kind he had not experienced in a long time. A crab latching onto his foot, his father nearly choking from laughter, and the playful scribbles they carved into their boat for no reason at all. It was enough to make him forget everything else. Time passed unnoticed until the sun began to set. Before heading back, they sat by the shore to enjoy the view a little longer. That was when he spotted a red carp swimming by, its scales shimmering under the fading sunlight. It was a rare sight, and without thinking twice, Leang dived into the water. The moment he hit the surface, the fish vanished, and with it, the lake was eerily empty, devoid of any signs of life. No matter how hard he tried, he could not move forward, as though something held him in place. Suddenly, his chest tightened, his limbs grew heavy, and all he could think about was hoping his father would pull him out. But the world around him dimmed, and in an instant, he woke up, except his father was no longer there. Instead, two strangers stood before him. Reality sank in. The day he had spent with his father had been nothing more than a dream. In truth, he had been captured, bound by these men. Zhang, the one he had trusted, had deceived him. Rather than guiding them as he had believed, they had only used him as bait for a water monster. It was a cruel fate, yet Leang remained calm. This was not his first life. Leang was a transmigrator from another world. A month had passed since he had arrived in this realm, taking over this body. The original owner had perished from illness, and somehow he had ended up in his place. His mother had died in childbirth, leaving him to be raised by his father alone. For years, it had just been the two of them, until 3 months ago, when his father succumbed to a respiratory disease. Now, all the emotions, grief, loneliness, and longing had become his own. He had never known what it was like to grow up with a family, yet in the past month, he had adapted to the former owner's relationships and daily life. During this time, he had also made a startling discovery. This world was anything but ordinary. It possessed extraordinary powers, where people trained their bodies and minds to surpass human limits. Those who succeeded were known as cultivators, but it was not just humans who could evolve through training. Animals could as well. Those who did became mythical beasts. As if on cue, a creature emerged from the depths of the lake. Even Zhang, a seasoned cultivator, felt his legs go weak at the sight of it. He had expected the water beast to be no longer than half a meter, but the information had been entirely wrong. When it surfaced, it easily rocked the boat, sending waves of panic through everyone on board. Still, Yang was not one to back down without a fight. He had trained for 10 years, and if the beast wished to devour them, it would have to work for it. The second the creature lunged, Yang retaliated, unleashing his most powerful attack. But the beast was colossal. Its jaws alone dwarfed him. Before he could even register what was happening, he was gone, swallowed whole like a mere snack. The impact shattered the boat into pieces, sending the remaining man into absolute panic. This was never part of the plan. He had no intention of dying here. Desperation took over, and in a last-ditch effort to save himself, he stabbed Liang's hand and threw him into the water, hoping the scent of blood would serve as a distraction. Bound by restraints, Leang sank rapidly, but he refused to surrender. He thrashed against the ropes, biting into the rough fibers. After several agonizing moments, they loosened just enough for him to break free. However, another problem arose. His oxygen was running out, and he had already sunk too deep. Darkness crept into his vision, and just as he was about to lose consciousness, a vision appeared stood before him, his father's arm reaching out. He knew it wasn't real, yet his body reacted instinctively, stretching his hand forward. To his surprise, he grasped something solid, a log, the very same one from his father's boat, the one they had carved their faces into all those years ago. A rush of emotions, gratitude, relief, and even warmth, despite the freezing water, overwhelmed him. Somehow, even in death, his father had saved him once again. But the moment was short-lived. The scent of his blood had spread, and the monster had caught it. Before he could react, sharp teeth clamped onto his leg, dragging him further into the depth. The pressure in his chest built, the light above faded completely, and he was pulled into the beast's lair. The sight before him sent a chill down his spine. Countless bodies long devoured, wrecked boats reduced to fragments, and piles of treasure glimmering like a cruel joke in the darkness. He had done everything he could to survive, but now it was clear there was no escape. With his last breath, he closed his eyes and whispered a silent apology to his father. Soon he would be joining him, but the water beast had other plans. Instead of finishing him off, it slammed him to the ground, toying with him like a predator playing with its food. Pain erupted through his body, but then something unexpected occurred. His blood, drifting through the water, seeped into the lake bed and touched something ancient, an artifact buried beneath the wreckage, a water cauldron. At that moment, an ancient being stirred. A surge of power coursed through Liang's body, foreign yet strangely familiar. The energy adapted to him, shaping itself into something he could instinctively understand. It resembled the game systems he had once played before transmigrating, and in that instant, his ability awakened: water manipulation. The change was immediate. The water surrounding Leang was no longer his enemy. It had become his domain. His wounds closed, his body strengthened, and suddenly it felt as though he was standing on solid ground. The resistance of the water seemed to vanish, leaving him to question how any of this was possible. As if in response to his thoughts, a system notification appeared, explaining everything. He had obtained a skill called water control, which granted him the ability to manipulate water currents and breathe underwater. It was a powerful skill, one that transformed the depths of the lake into his battlefield. Before Leang could fully process his newfound abilities, the beast struck again, lunging forward to devour him. But this time, Leang was no longer helpless. With a mere thought, the water twisted and surged, catching the beast mid-swim and suspending it in place. A rush of power filled him, an intoxicating sensation that made him realize he had no limits underwater. However, reality quickly set in. This power was new, and his control over it was far from perfect. The beast struggled, breaking free from his grip, and lunged again. Yet with his newfound mobility, Liang easily dodged the attack, slipping through the water as if it were second nature. Still, dodging alone wouldn't be enough. Without a weapon, Liang needed another way to defeat the beast. Just as that thought crossed his mind, the system responded. It turned out he wasn't just a simple water manipulator. He had another skill called blood domination, which allowed him to inscribe ancient runes using his own blood, forming contracts with aquatic spirit beasts. This revelation made his pulse quicken. It was exactly what he needed. In an instant, he formulated a plan. The moment the beast surged toward him again, Liang used water control to halt its movement just long enough to inscribe the necessary runes, creating a blood domination talisman. As soon as the beast broke free from his water hold, Liang weaved around its massive form and slammed the talisman onto its head. However, forming a contract was easier said than done. It became a battle of spiritual force. The beast fought back, lashing out with the intent to crush Liang's very soul. His vision darkened, his body stiffened, and for a moment, it felt as though the creature's will was overwhelming his own. But Leang had an advantage. His soul had lived twice. Drawing on its combined strength, he pushed back. His soul energy surged, overpowering the beast's resistance. In the end, he emerged victorious. The contract was sealed, and Liang floated back to the surface, breaking through the water with a deep, desperate inhale. The air filled his lungs, and for the first time since the ordeal began, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The beast emerged right after him, no longer an enemy but an ally. Its massive form loomed over the lake, its eyes locked onto Liang with newfound reverence. It had fully submitted to him. However, there was one problem. Liang couldn't exactly stroll back into the village with a gigantic water beast at his side. That would cause all kinds of trouble. Through their newly formed spiritual link, He ordered the beast to stay behind, summoning it only when needed. With that, the beast disappeared into the depths, retreating to its hidden lair, a good place to lay low. As for Leang, it was time to leave. The next day, the old man who had thrown him into the lake as bait arrived at the village, dragging along his crew and steward Jung. They weren't there to offer condolences, assuming Leang was already dead. Instead, the old man had his sights set on something else, Leang's father's fortune. In his mind, it was compensation for the botched mission. After all, their plan had failed, Xiao was dead, and someone had to pay for it. With that in mind, they marched straight to Liang's house. The moment they reached the door, they kicked it wide open, expecting an empty room. Instead, they froze. Standing right there was Leang, alive and well. For a moment, the entire group stood in stunned silence, their faces frozen in disbelief. However, the shock was short-lived. Steward Young's expression twisted into one of pure rage, directed squarely at the old Geyer. The steward had failed to verify the facts, but it didn't matter. He was already convinced that Liang Ku was responsible for the botched mission. Someone had to take the blame, and Young didn't hesitate to order his men to restrain Liang and teach him a harsh lesson. The death of Jiao wasn't just an inconvenience. It had cost Young a significant amount of money. To make matters worse, the entire village was now in danger because the beast was still at large. According to Jung and his men, all of this was Liang's fault, a claim that was entirely baseless. Liang vehemently refuted the accusations, shifting the blame back onto the old man. But the old Geyer was far too cunning to be cornered so easily. Instead, the old man flipped the script, pointing out Liang's miraculous survival. How could a mere brat like him return alive unless he had been working with the beast? With that, the accusation took a darker turn. Liang was no longer just a troublemaker. He was now being labeled a monster. The old man claimed that Liang had controlled the water beast and was responsible for Jiao's death. It was an absurd accusation, but Liang was no stranger to being labeled a freak. In his previous life, Liang had been an orphan, and the other children had treated him like a bad omen, a walking misfortune. Rumors had spread that orphans were cursed or prone to stealing, and no matter what he did, the stigma had never left him. But Liang wasn't the type to roll over and accept such treatment. He had endured enough in his past life, and he refused to be pushed around in this one, especially by someone as despicable as the old Geyer, who was already missing a tooth. Liang decided then and there that he would help the old man lose a few more. Without hesitation, Liang tackled the old Geyer, shoving him back with enough force to send him stumbling. He then locked onto the nearest basin of water. If they wanted him to be a monster so badly, fine. He would show them what a real monster looked like. Water surged up his arm, twisting and coiling like a living serpent. His anger sharpened his focus, and for a moment, he was ready to take every single one of them down with him. But just as he was about to unleash his power, his childhood friend arrived, rushing in alongside the village chief. The chief's voice cut through the chaos, carrying an authority that even Steward Young couldn't ignore. Though the chief appeared ancient, he was still an official of the dynasty, a figure of real power. This meant Jung had no choice but to comply. Before storming off, however, Jung shot the chief a venomous glare, vowing that his master, Xiao, would hear about this. The old Geyer, however, remained unfazed. He knew it was an empty threat. Even Jung's master would bow to the chief's authority. Once the confrontation had settled, Liang let out a slow breath and turned to the village chief, offering a nod of gratitude. With nothing else left to do, they left the scene. But Liang knew better. This wasn't the end. Situations like this would keep happening unless he took matters into his own hands. Determined to survive in this world, Liang made a decision. He would use his system to its fullest potential and grow stronger as quickly as possible. It was then that he noticed something strange. His water essence was increasing. At first he wasn't sure why, but then it clicked. His crocodile pet had something to do with it. Intrigued, Liang waited for nightfall before returning to the lake. Once there, he activated his spirit link to summon his water beast. When the creature finally surfaced, it was bite-sized, completely surprising Liang. Just as he was about to ask questions, the system chimed in, explaining that subdued and contracted beasts could adjust their body size at will to manage energy consumption. This made sense to Liang, but he wasn't there to admire his pet's new party trick. He wanted to uncover the source of the water essence he had sensed. Without delay, Liang commanded his small companion to lead the way. The crocodile dove into the water and Leang followed closely. The water beast guided him deeper into the lake, weaving through the murky depths until they slipped into a hidden underwater cave. The moment Leang stepped inside, his eyes widened in astonishment. Countless legendary spirit plants sprawled across the cave floor, glowing faintly with rich spiritual energy. He reached out, brushing his fingers against one, and immediately a system prompt appeared, offering him the option to absorb it. This was a loot drop Leang couldn't afford to pass up. In this world, spiritual materials and treasures absorbed extraordinary energies over time, making them incredibly valuable. Spirit plants in particular possessed unique effects depending on their properties. Rumor had it that in Gia Manor's backyard, there was a frozen pond where special vines grew at the bottom. These vines were so rare and powerful that Master Xiao used them to lure cultivators into servitude. Yet here Liang stood surrounded by a cave full of them. Absorbing these plants would undoubtedly boost his water essence exactly what he needed. Without wasting any time, Liang got to work. He gathered as many plants as he could. He briefly considered asking his beast for help, but when he glanced over, the crocodile was already bloated, having eaten a few plants itself. Seeing it floating around, clearly full and content, Liang decided to let it rest. After all, it had earned a nap for leading him to such a treasure trove. Once he had gathered everything, Liang began devouring the plants. With just one plant, his water essence increased by 1. Not only were these spirit plants incredibly beneficial, but they were also delicious, making it far too easy for him to consume them one after another. He kept eating, absorbing as much water essence as possible. The more he accumulated, the stronger his fusion with aquatic spirits would become, and the faster his aquatic beasts could evolve. There were so many plants that, for a moment, Liang felt like he had overindulged. But it was worth it. He had gained 25 water essence. Without hesitation, he invested it into his fusion with the water monkey bloodline, increasing it from 5% to 7.5%. This significant boost in power filled him with confidence. If he ever encountered those adversaries from before, he was certain he could take them on easily. However, that confrontation would have to wait. Leang had a more pressing issue. He was broke. Autumn was coming to an end, and during this season, crocodiles slowed down due to hibernation, meaning he couldn't rely on them for hunting. With time running out, Leang devised a simple plan. Exploit the crocodiles now and gather as much profit as possible before they became useless. With this in mind, he commanded his crocodile to hunt as many fish as it could. Soon, he had stacked up a huge haul, which he sold to the merchants. Unlike the hustling vendors from his previous life, the merchants in this world were far easier to negotiate with. Just like that, Liang's financial struggles were resolved. Now it was time to settle things with the old man who had tried to set him up. But before Liang could make a move, the old man played right into his hands. Apparently, the old man had been searching for Liang to apologize for their earlier misunderstanding. To show his sincerity, he invited Liang to a meal on his boat, just the two of them. Liang nearly laughed out loud at the blatant transparency of the old man's scheme. Instead of calling him out, however, Liang decided to play along. After all, this was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for.